They fought over millions, but one man walked away with a broken house no one wanted. A veteran Navy SEAL chose silence over greed, and his dog knew something he didn't. That old lodge in the forest wasn't just falling apart. It was hiding something. While his family celebrated their fortune, everything around him began to whisper a different truth. And the only one who could hear it clearly wasn't human. What he found beneath that house would change everything they thought they had won. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The law office smelled like old wood, lemon polish, and something heavier. Something that clung to the back of the throat like unspoken regret. It was the kind of room where decisions didn't echo. They settled, quietly, like dust on forgotten shelves. Outside, Pine Hollow was wrapped in early autumn light. The northern forest glowed. Tall pines standing like silent witnesses, golden leaves drifting lazily across the gravel road. It was almost beautiful enough to forgive the weight inside that room. Almost. Inside, the Mercer siblings sat across a long mahogany table that had probably witnessed more quiet betrayals than any battlefield. They didn't look like family. They looked like adversaries waiting for the signal to strike. At the head of the table sat Preston Mercer, the eldest. Mid-40s, tall and sharply built, his posture was always perfectly upright, as if slouching would be a form of financial loss. His dark hair was slicked back with precision, not a strand out of place, and his clean-shaven face had that polished, controlled look of a man who treated life like a negotiation. His suit was charcoal, tailored so well it looked like it belonged to him more than his own skin. His watch, silver, expensive, caught the light every time he moved, as if reminding everyone what time cost. To his right sat Vivian Mercer, early 40s, elegant in a way that tried a little too hard. Her long coat draped perfectly over her shoulders, but her fingers, thin, manicured, tapped against the table with a rhythm that betrayed something beneath the surface. Her blonde hair was styled flawlessly, yet her eyes, sharp, tired, held the faint tremor of someone standing on a cliff she pretended not to see. Beauty, held together by pressure. And then there was Rowan Mercer, 43 years old, former Navy SEAL. He didn't belong in that room. He sat at the far end, shoulders broad, posture relaxed, but not careless, like a man who had learned to conserve energy because he knew what exhaustion really meant. His face was angular, jaw strong, with a rough line of stubble that never quite turned into a beard. His skin was sun-weathered, marked by years outdoors, and his eyes, blue-gray, didn't flicker with tension. They absorbed it. He wore the same thing he always wore, an olive field jacket faded by time, dark cargo pants, worn brown boots. No polish, no display, just function. At his side sat the only creature in the room that hadn't learned how to lie. Flint. A German Shepherd K9, about 5 or 6 years old. His coat was black and tan, thick and clean despite the long drive. He didn't move much, didn't need to. His presence filled the space between breaths. His ears twitched at the smallest sound. His eyes didn't wander. They studied, not people, everything. A clock ticked somewhere behind them, slow, deliberate, like a countdown. At the far end of the room stood Harrison Cole, the family's attorney. 70, thin, with silver hair combed neatly back and glasses perched low on his nose. His suit was modest, worn at the elbows, but his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades watching people ruin themselves with signatures. He cleared his throat. "Your father's estate," he began, "has been divided into 2 separate lots." Preston leaned forward instantly. Vivian stopped tapping her nails. Rowan didn't move. "The first, Lot A, contains approximately $28 million in financial assets. Stocks, bonds, offshore accounts tied to several legal entities. Preston exhaled slowly, almost satisfied. Vivian's lips parted just enough to let relief escape. Money, clear, simple, immediate. Then Harrison raised a finger. The second, Lot B, consists of Mercer Ridge Lodge. Silence. Preston leaned back. Vivian rolled her eyes slightly. Harrison continued, unfazed. The property includes the main structure surrounding forest land and all associated liabilities. The building is in severe disrepair. There are outstanding property taxes, structural violations, and it is classified under regional preservation laws. It cannot be demolished. A pause. Then, calmly, it must be restored or seized. Preston scoffed. So it's worthless. Worse, Vivian added quietly. It's expensive. Rowan said nothing. Flint's ears shifted. Harrison folded his hands. Your father anticipated disagreement, so he included a condition. The clock ticked louder. You have 24 hours to reach a unanimous decision. Preston frowned. And if we don't? Then the entire estate, Harrison said, is transferred to the Pine Hollow Conservation Trust. The words didn't land like a bomb. They landed like gravity. Slow, unavoidable. Preston stood up immediately. That's ridiculous. We're not letting millions go because of a shack in the woods. Vivian leaned forward. Then we agree. He takes the house. She didn't even look at Rowan, just pointed. Preston smirked. Makes sense. He likes the wilderness. Rowan watched them. No anger, no reaction, just observation. Flint stood up. No warning, no sound. He walked past Rowan, across the polished floor, toward the small wooden box resting beside Harrison's desk. The one holding the lodge keys. He lowered his head, pressed his nose gently against it, then froze. Not curious, not playful. Still. The kind of stillness that used to make Rowan stop mid-step in Afghanistan, before anyone else even heard the click beneath the dirt. Rowan felt it before he understood it. That quiet shift in the air. That wrongness. Flint didn't move away. He blocked the box, as if something invisible stood behind it, waiting. Rowan's fingers tightened slightly on his knee, and just like that, the room wasn't about money anymore. Preston laughed. What? Your dog picking your inheritance now? Vivian smiled thinly. At least someone in this family knows what he's good for. Rowan didn't answer. His eyes stayed on Flint. Then slowly, a memory surfaced. A voice. His father's. Years ago, standing on the porch of that same lodge, watching the trees sway. Don't ever choose the easiest thing, Rowan. Easy things don't hold. Rowan exhaled, looked at Preston, at Vivian, at the polished table between them. Then he spoke. I'll take it. The words landed quietly. Preston blinked. Excuse me? The lodge, Rowan said. I'll take Lot B. Vivian let out a short laugh, sharp, almost relieved. You're serious? Rowan nodded. No hesitation. Preston's smile returned instantly, sharper now. Then we're done here. He grabbed the documents, signed. Vivian followed, her pen moving faster than her thoughts. Rowan signed last. The ink dried. Just like that, the room changed. Preston checked his watch. Well, this worked out better than expected. Vivian stood, adjusting her coat. You always did have a thing for lost causes, Rowan. Neither of them said goodbye. They walked out already reaching for their phones, already planning what to do with money they hadn't even touched yet. The door closed. Silence returned. Harrison Cole looked at Rowan for a long moment. You understand what you've done, he said quietly. Rowan stood. Flint returned to his side. "I do." Harrison hesitated, then slid the small wooden box across the table. Inside, old brass keys. Cold, heavy, real. Rowan picked them up. For a brief second, he thought he saw something in Harrison's eyes. Not pity. Something else. Something closer to respect. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Flint stepped toward the door first. Rowan followed. As they walked out into the light, the world felt quieter. Not easier. Just clearer. Somewhere behind him, a clock stopped ticking. And for the first time since the funeral, Rowan didn't feel like he had lost something. He felt like he had stepped into something unfinished. Flint paused on the steps, looked back at him not questioning, confirming. Rowan gave the smallest nod, the kind only a soldier or a dog would understand. And together, they walked toward the road that led into the forest, toward a place everyone else had already abandoned. The road into Mercer Ridge Lodge narrowed until it was barely a road at all. Just two worn tracks cutting through tall northern pines that seemed to lean inward, as if guarding something they had watched for too long. Rowan Mercer drove slowly, his old pickup truck rumbling over roots and stone. The sunlight filtered through the trees in fractured beams, touching the ground in scattered gold. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. Flint sat upright in the passenger seat, body still, head slightly forward. His ears shifted constantly, catching things Rowan couldn't hear. The dog wasn't tense, but he wasn't relaxed either. He was alert. That in-between state Rowan knew too well. They reached the clearing just before dusk. Mercer Ridge Lodge stood there like a memory someone had tried to erase but failed. The structure was large, larger than Rowan remembered from childhood. But time had not been kind. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing like broken teeth. The wooden walls had darkened unevenly, stained by years of rain and neglect. One side of the porch had collapsed inward. The beams splintered like snapped bones. Windows stared out empty and cracked. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Rowan stepped out of the truck, boots crunching on gravel and fallen needles. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. Flint jumped down beside him. No barking, no excitement. The dog's nose lifted slightly, drawing in the air. Then he moved, not toward the front door, but around the side of the house, slow and deliberate. Rowan followed. The ground near the foundation was uneven, the soil shifting where roots had begun to reclaim what man had built. Moss crept up along the stone base, thick and damp. Flint stopped, lowered his head, inhaled, then took 2 steps back and sat down, not resting, waiting. Rowan crouched beside him, placing a hand gently against the dog's neck. Flint's muscles were tight under his fingers. Not fear, not aggression, recognition. "Yeah," Rowan muttered quietly. "I feel it too." He didn't know what it was, but he didn't argue with it. They circled back to the front. The door resisted when Rowan pushed it open, wood groaning as if reluctant to move. The hinges protested, the sound echoing into the hollow interior. Dust floated in the air, catching the last of the evening light. The inside was worse. Furniture lay draped in moldy sheets. Some collapsed entirely. The smell was thick, damp wood, mildew, something faintly metallic buried beneath it all. The floor creaked under every step, some boards dipping dangerously. Rowan moved slowly, scanning, not for beauty, for threats. Old habits didn't disappear, they just changed environments. Flint moved ahead of him, stepping lightly, his paws almost silent against the warped wood. Occasionally he would pause, glance back, not for permission, but for confirmation. They cleared the main room. Kitchen, rotted cabinets, rusted sink. Dining area, table half collapsed, chairs missing legs. Then the fireplace, large, stone, dominant in the room. Rowan stopped. Not because he saw something, because Flint did. The dog approached the fireplace slowly, nose low, tail still. He sniffed along the stone, tracing an invisible line only he could sense. Then he froze. One paw lifted slightly off the ground, a signal Rowan hadn't seen in years, the same signal Flint used when something was buried. Something real. Rowan stepped closer. "Easy," he said, voice calm. Flint didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on a specific section near the base of the stone wall. Rowan reached out, touching the surface. Cold, rough, nothing unusual, at least to sight. But Flint shifted again. Then, gently, he scratched. Not digging, not aggressive, just pointing. Rowan leaned closer, his breath slowing. That faint metallic smell again. Not strong, but there, under the damp, under the rot. Something else lived in this place. Night fell quickly. The forest swallowed the light, leaving the lodge in a dim, uneven glow from a single lantern Rowan set on the floor. The power was dead. The silence outside was thick. No traffic, no distant hum of civilization. Just wind moving through trees. Rowan dragged a chair into the corner of the main room and sat, elbows on knees, staring at the fireplace. Flint lay nearby, but not asleep. His head rested on his paws, eyes open, watching. Hours passed. The house made noises, soft cracks, settling wood, distance shifting. Normal, Rowan told himself, normal. But something about the fireplace kept pulling his attention back. He stood, walked toward it again, ran his hand along the stone. Nothing. Flint stood too. This time he didn't approach immediately. Instead, he moved to the center of the room, turned slowly. And then, unexpectedly, he faced Rowan, held his gaze. It wasn't a command, it wasn't confusion. It was insistence. Rowan frowned slightly. "What?" he muttered. Flint broke eye contact, turned, walked not to the fireplace, but toward a narrow hallway Rowan hadn't checked yet. Flint stopped at the end of the hallway. There was a door, old, half-rotten, barely hanging on its hinges. He didn't sniff it, didn't touch it. He just sat and waited. Rowan approached slowly. Something about the air here was different, cooler, stiller, like stepping into a space that hadn't been disturbed in years. He pushed the door open. Inside, a small study. Shelves lined the walls, most of them empty, but a few still held stacks of papers, folders, notebooks. A desk sat against the far wall, coated in dust. Rowan stepped in. Flint stayed at the doorway, watching, not entering. Rowan moved to the desk, ran a hand across the surface, clearing a path through the dust. There, a notebook, leather-bound, worn, familiar, his father's. Rowan picked it up slowly. For a moment he didn't open it. His thumb rested on the edge. Then, he flipped it open. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight, controlled, slightly slanted. The last pages were filled, recent, not old, not forgotten, deliberate. Rowan read the first line. "If you're standing here, it means you came back." His chest tightened. Flint shifted behind him, still not entering the room. Rowan turned a page. "I made mistakes, more than you know. But this place, this foundation, it was never about money." Another page. "They will choose the numbers. You will choose the weight." Rowan stopped, closed his eyes briefly. The words didn't surprise him. They confirmed something he hadn't wanted to believe. This wasn't random. None of it was. He opened the notebook again. Near the bottom of the page, a single line stood alone. The dog will understand before you do. Rowan exhaled slowly. A humorless half-smile touched his face. Figures, he muttered. He turned back toward the doorway. Flint was still there, waiting. Rowan stepped out. The dog immediately turned and walked back toward the main room, back toward the fireplace. Rowan followed. No hesitation now. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt intentional. Every step, every creak, every shadow. Rowan stopped in front of the stone again. Flint stood beside him. This time Rowan didn't question it. He knelt down, pressed his hand firmly against the base, closed his eyes, not searching, listening. For the first time since he had arrived, he wasn't thinking about the money, or the mistake, or his siblings. Just the structure beneath his hand, the weight of it, the silence. Then he opened his eyes, looked at Flint, and gave a small nod. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out." Outside, the wind picked up slightly, moving through the trees like a distant whisper. Inside, the lodge held its breath. And for the first time, Rowan didn't feel like he was standing in a ruin. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something unfinished, something waiting. Morning arrived slowly over Mercer Ridge Lodge, not with warmth, but with a pale gray light that filtered through the tall pines like something uncertain. The forest did not wake loudly. It stretched, it listened, it waited. Inside the lodge, Rowan Mercer had not slept. He stood in the main room, sleeves rolled, notebook in hand, measuring tape clipped to his belt. The house no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a problem. And Rowan had spent most of his life solving problems that didn't forgive mistakes. Flint moved quietly across the room, nose low, retracing the same invisible path along the stonework. The dog had not lost interest overnight. If anything, his focus had sharpened. That was never a good sign. Rowan marked the numbers carefully. Exterior wall, 45 feet. Interior measurement, 31. He checked again. Same result. He stood still for a long moment, staring at the stone wall beneath the fireplace. "That's not settling," he muttered under his breath. It wasn't decay. It wasn't time. It was design. Flint stopped beside him, body angled toward the wall again, but this time he didn't move closer. He stood there, quiet, steady, as if he already knew what Rowan was about to accept. There was something behind that wall, and it had been put there on purpose. By midday, Rowan made the call. The signal was weak, cutting in and out, but it held long enough. "You still owe me a favor?" Rowan asked. A pause. Then a familiar voice answered, rough and amused. "Depends. You finally admit I saved your life in Kandahar?" Rowan almost smiled. "You talk too much, Boone." "I talk because you don't," the voice replied. "What do you need?" Rowan glanced at the wall again. A second set of eyes. "And tools that don't come from a hardware store." Another pause. Then the voice changed. Less humor, more attention. "You found something." Rowan didn't answer directly. "Can you get here?" A short breath came through the line. "Yeah," the man said. "Give me a day." The next problem arrived before the solution did. A green truck pulled into the clearing just after noon, tires crunching over gravel that hadn't heard traffic in years. Rowan stepped outside as the engine died. The driver's door opened, and Mara Bellamy stepped out. She moved like someone who belonged to the forest, not cautious, but aware. Mid-30s, lean build, practical strength. Her chestnut brown hair was tied low at the back of her neck, strands already loosening in the breeze. Her skin carried the faint weathering of someone who worked outdoors year-round, and her eyes, sharp, alert, took in everything before settling on Rowan. She wore a moss-green Ranger parka over a gray sweater, Dark outdoor pants, boots built for mud and distance. A radio clipped to her shoulder. A sidearm rested quietly at her hip. Not for threat, but for reality. "You're Rowan Mercer," she said, not asking. Rowan nodded once. "Mara Bellamy, Forestry Service." "I figured." Her gaze moved past him, landing on the lodge. Her expression didn't change, but something tightened beneath it. "You're aware this property is under preservation status," she said. "That means no structural modification without clearance." Rowan leaned lightly against the porch post. "Good thing I haven't modified anything yet." Her eyes flicked to the open door, then to Flint, who had stepped out beside Rowan, standing still, watching her. Mara paused for half a second. Not fear. Recognition. "That dog," she said quietly. "K9? Used to be." She nodded once, as if that explained more than Rowan had said. Then her attention returned to him. "I've seen what happens when people try to fix places like this," she said. "They tear out what matters because they don't understand it." Rowan didn't argue. He just reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. Silas Mercer's property filings. Mara took it. Read. Slowly. Her expression shifted, not softer, but more focused. "This was filed recently," she said. "Before he died," Rowan replied. She looked up at him. "Your father fought to keep this place from being condemned," she said. "Why?" Rowan met her gaze. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Silence hung between them for a moment. Then Mara folded the document carefully and handed it back. "I'm not giving you permission to tear into this place," she said. Rowan nodded. "But," she added, "I'm also not shutting you down, yet." A small window. That was all he needed. Caleb Boone arrived the next morning. The sound of his truck came before the vehicle itself, a heavy diesel growl cutting through the quiet forest. When he stepped out, he looked exactly like Rowan remembered. Early 50s. Broad-shouldered, thick arms, the kind of strength that didn't come from a gym, but from years of lifting things that didn't want to move. His face was square, weathered, with a short beard shot through with gray. His eyes were sharp but tired, like a man who had seen enough to stop being surprised. He wore a brown canvas work jacket, flannel shirt underneath, dark jeans, heavy boots. A tool belt hung low on his hips. He looked at Rowan, then at the lodge, then back at Rowan. "All right," Caleb said. "How bad is it?" Rowan gestured inside. Caleb walked in, boots heavy against the floor. He didn't speak for a while. Just moved, examined, tapped wood, checked angles. Then he stopped at the fireplace, tilted his head slightly, ran his hand along the stone. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's not original." Rowan crossed his arms. "You sure?" Caleb crouched, pulling a small tool from his belt. He scraped lightly at the mortar. Fresh, not decades old, not even close. "This section was sealed," Caleb said, "and not by someone sloppy." Flint stepped closer, standing beside him. Caleb glanced at the dog. "He's been doing that all day?" he asked. "Since I got here." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then I'd listen to him." They worked in silence for a while. Careful work. Measured. Not demolition, surgery. Piece by piece, Caleb loosened sections of stone, testing the structure before applying force. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cool air. Then, Flint moved. Not toward the wall, away from it. He backed up 3 steps, then sat, his eyes fixed on Rowan, not on the stone, on Rowan. And for a moment, just a moment, Rowan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not danger, something deeper. The same instinct that used to tell him when a room wasn't just a room, when a step wasn't just a step. He raised a hand. "Stop," he said quietly. Caleb froze mid-swing. What? Rowan didn't answer. He stepped forward slowly, examined the section they were about to break. Something was off. Not visible, but wrong. He crouched, tapped the stone, listened, then moved 6 inches to the left, tapped again, hollow. He looked back at Flint. The dog didn't move, just watched. Rowan exhaled slowly. Here, he said. Caleb adjusted position, swung once. The sound was different. Crack. Not solid impact. Fracture. Another swing. The stone shifted. And then, with a dull, heavy break, a section gave way. Cold air rushed out. Not damp, not stale. Cold, dry, ancient. Caleb stepped back instinctively. What the hell? Rowan didn't answer. Flint stood. But he didn't advance. He held position, as if the threshold itself mattered. They widened the opening carefully. Brick gave way to darkness. A void. Not collapse. Space. Deliberate space. Rowan stepped closer, crouching at the edge. The air that came from within carried a different scent. Metal, dust, something preserved. Not rot, not decay. Storage. Caleb leaned in, peering over Rowan's shoulder. You don't build something like this by accident, he said quietly. Rowan nodded. No disagreement, no surprise, just confirmation. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a flashlight, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. Stairs, narrow, descending, stone-lined, old, but intact. Rowan held the light steady, didn't move yet, didn't rush. He had learned that the first step into the unknown was rarely the most dangerous. It was the second. Flint stepped forward then, just one step, stopping at Rowan's side. Not blocking, not warning, present. Rowan looked at him, then back at the stairs. And for the first time since he had taken the lodge, something inside him settled. Not because he understood, but because he knew. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. All right, he said quietly. Caleb let out a breath behind him. You go first, he muttered. Rowan almost smiled. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight and stepped toward the darkness. The air below the lodge did not smell like decay. It smelled like something preserved. Rowan Mercer stood at the base of the narrow stone stairs, flashlight steady in his hand, beam cutting through the darkness in a clean, unwavering line. Behind him, Caleb Boone shifted his weight slightly, boots scraping against the stone with a dull echo. Above them, the lodge creaked faintly, distant now, like a different world. Flint descended first. Not quickly, not cautiously, purposefully. His body lowered as he stepped, each paw placed with careful precision. His ears tilted forward, catching the quiet in a way Rowan had learned to trust long ago. This wasn't the alert posture of danger. It was recognition. Rowan followed. Each step down felt deliberate, heavier than the last, not because of the weight of the structure, but because something inside him had already begun to shift. The deeper he went, the less this felt like discovery, and the more it felt like arrival. The stairs opened into a chamber, not large, not elaborate, but built with intention. Stone walls lined cleanly, reinforced with timber beams that had aged without collapsing. The ground was packed earth, dry and level. Dust rested lightly over everything, undisturbed for years, maybe decades. But it wasn't empty. Crates, metal, wood, stacked with order, not chaos. Rowan stepped forward slowly, sweeping the light across the room. Nothing had been thrown together here. Everything had been placed. Caleb let out a low breath. This wasn't hiding, he muttered. This was storage. Rowan didn't respond. Flint had already moved, straight to the far left corner. He didn't sniff every crate, didn't wander. He chose. 3 containers, smaller than the rest, set slightly apart. Rowan approached them, crouching down. His hand rested briefly on the first lid. The metal was cool, not just from the air, but from time. Caleb stepped beside him, wiping his hands against his jeans. "Moment of truth," he said. Rowan nodded once. "Open it." The latch resisted slightly, then gave. Caleb lifted the lid. For a second, no one spoke. The flashlight beam hit the surface and bounced back. Dull yellow. Not polished. Not pristine. Real. Gold. Not stacked like a fantasy. Not overflowing. Just enough. Heavy bars laid side by side, each one worn with faint marks, edges softened by handling long ago. Caleb let out a quiet whistle. "That's not decoration." Rowan reached in, lifting one bar. It dragged slightly against the others, weight answering before his mind could. Solid, unmistakable. Flint didn't react. He didn't even look. Instead, he turned his head toward the second crate. Rowan followed his gaze. "Next one," he said. Caleb closed the first and moved to the second container. This one was wooden, reinforced with iron bands. The lid creaked open. Inside, paper. But not ordinary paper. Thick, sealed, organized in bundles tied with faded twine. Rowan pulled one free, brushing dust aside. His eyes moved quickly across the surface. Land deeds, mineral rights, water access claims. Survey maps stamped with dates older than he expected. Caleb leaned over his shoulder. "That's not junk," he said. "That's control." Rowan didn't look up. He kept reading. Names of companies, old agreements, signatures. Silas Mercer, over and over. This wasn't inheritance. This was a ledger of something much larger. Flint shifted again. Not impatient, directed. Toward the third crate. Rowan set the papers down carefully, moved to the final container, opened it. This one told the truth plainly. A thin layer of gold rested on top. But beneath it, more documents, more records, more proof. The gold was visible. The value beneath it was not. Rowan exhaled slowly. Understanding didn't come all at once. It built, layer by layer, like the room itself. "Starter fuel," Caleb muttered, nodding toward the gold. "And the rest?" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Rowan already knew. At the center of the room stood a small steel box. Unlike the crates, it wasn't part of the storage. It was separate, deliberate. Flint approached it this time. Slowly. He nudged it once with his nose, then stepped back and sat. Rowan walked forward, knelt. His fingers hovered over the lid for a moment before opening it. Inside, a single envelope. Heavy paper, sealed. His name written across the front. Not printed, not formal, personal. Rowan didn't rush. He broke the seal carefully, unfolding the letter inside. The handwriting was steady, familiar. His father's voice captured in ink. Rowan read. Silas Mercer didn't apologize. He didn't explain everything. He didn't need to. He laid it out simply. The money in Lot A wasn't clean. It was tied to entities under scrutiny. Tax exposure, legal risk. The kind that didn't surface immediately. But when it did, it took everything with it. Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. He could see it now. The structure, the setup. Not a trap, a mirror. Silas had known what each of them would choose, and built the outcome around it. Rowan turned the page, then stopped. One line, simple, direct. I did not leave you wealth. I left you time. Flint stood suddenly, not alarmed, not aggressive, but aware. He turned, not toward Rowan, but toward the far wall of the chamber, a section Rowan hadn't examined yet. The dog walked to it slowly, stopped, then did something Rowan hadn't seen before. Flint pressed his head gently, firmly, against the stone. Not sniffing, not scratching, just contact. Holding it there, eyes closed. For a moment that stretched longer than it should have, Rowan felt it again. That quiet shift. That subtle, impossible sensation that something unseen had just acknowledged them. Not a threat, not a warning, a presence. Gone as quickly as it came. Flint stepped back, opened his eyes, and returned to Rowan's side. Nothing else moved. Nothing else changed. But the room felt different. Rowan folded the letter slowly, placed it back into the box. He didn't need to read further to understand. This wasn't about luck. It wasn't about being chosen. It was about being expected. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, still scanning the crates. "So let me get this straight," he said. "Your old man knew they'd go for the money." Rowan nodded once. "And he knew you wouldn't." Rowan didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved across the room again. The gold, the documents, the structure. Then finally, Flint, sitting calmly, watching. "I don't think it was about what I do," Rowan said quietly. Caleb frowned. "Then what?" Rowan stood, picked up one of the gold bars again, weighed it in his hand, then set it back. "About what I wouldn't do." Caleb studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds about right." They didn't take anything immediately, not yet. Rowan wasn't reckless, not with something this deliberate. He closed each crate carefully, marked their positions, turned back toward the stairs. Flint moved ahead again. No hesitation, no fear, just direction. As they climbed back toward the light, the forest above seemed quieter than before. Or maybe Rowan had just learned how to listen differently. At the top, he paused, looked back down into the darkness. For a brief second, he thought of Preston, of Vivian, of the choice they had made. Not wrong, just incomplete. He turned away, stepped fully into the light, and for the first time since the lawyer's office. Rowan didn't feel like he had lost anything. He felt like he had been given exactly what he needed. Not more, not less, just enough. Flint stepped beside him, shoulder brushing lightly against Rowan's leg. A simple gesture, grounding. Rowan glanced down. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We'll do it right." The wind moved through the trees again. This time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like agreement. The first bill arrived before the roof stopped leaking. It came folded in stiff white paper, stamped with the county seal. Slipped through the cracked mailbox at the edge of the overgrown path. Rowan Mercer held it between his fingers for a moment before opening it, already knowing what it would say. Delinquent taxes, structural violations, notices written in language that sounded polite but carried the quiet threat of erasure. He stood on the porch, the wood groaning beneath his boots, and looked out over the clearing. The forest didn't care about paperwork. The wind moved the same whether a man owned the land or lost it. Flint sat beside him, watching. Not the paper, not the house, but Rowan. Always Rowan. Rowan exhaled slowly, folding the notice once, twice, slipping it into his jacket pocket. There was enough gold below to fix the immediate problem. Enough to breathe, not enough to be careless. Inside, Caleb Boone was already working. He had stripped off his jacket, sleeves rolled, sweat darkening the flannel across his back despite the cool air. His movements were efficient. No wasted effort, no hesitation. He dismantled damaged sections of wall with the quiet patience of someone who knew that fixing something properly meant understanding how it had been built in the first place. "Roof's worse than it looked," Caleb called without turning. "You're not patching that. You're replacing sections." Rowan nodded. "One section at a time?" Caleb snorted. "That's one way to say you're broke." Rowan didn't argue. He wasn't offended by the truth. He had lived with less. The first time Rowan left the lodge after discovering the hidden chamber, it wasn't for supplies. It was for a conversation he didn't want to have. He drove into Pine Hollow, the small town sitting like a quiet afterthought at the edge of the forest. Wooden storefronts, a single gas station, a diner that hadn't changed its sign in decades. The kind of place where people noticed you, but didn't ask questions unless they had to. The workshop sat at the far end of town. No sign. Just a narrow building with a faded door and a small, dusty window. Rowan stepped inside. The smell hit first. Metal, oil, old wood, not unpleasant. Just honest. Behind the counter stood Elias Boone, 72 years old. Thin, almost fragile at a glance, but the kind of fragile that came from time, not weakness. His hair was white, cut short, uneven in places, as if he didn't care for mirrors. His face was lined deeply, every crease earned. But his eyes, pale blue, were sharp. Too sharp. He wore a gray cardigan over a worn shirt, sleeves slightly too long, fingers stained faintly from years of working with metal. He didn't look up immediately. He finished polishing a small object in his hand, set it down, then raised his eyes slowly. They locked onto Rowan, and held. "You've got your father's posture," Elias said finally. His voice was quiet, dry. "Same way of standing like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Rowan stepped forward. "You knew him well?" Elias shrugged lightly. "Long enough." His gaze shifted briefly toward Flint, who had entered silently behind Rowan and now stood near the door, observing. Elias nodded once. "And that one. I don't need an introduction." Flint didn't react. Rowan reached into his jacket, placed a single gold bar on the counter. Elias didn't touch it right away. He looked at Rowan first. "Where?" Rowan met his gaze. "Somewhere that matters." A faint smile, barely there. "That's what I was afraid of." Elias picked up the gold, turning it slowly under the light. His fingers were careful, respectful, not greedy. He checked markings, weight, edges. "Old," he murmured. "Clean enough." He set it down again. "I can move this," he said. "Small amounts, quietly. Legitimate channels." Rowan nodded. "That's all I need." Elias leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the counter. "You don't look like a man who came into money," he said. "I didn't?" Elias studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good," he said. "Money ruins the wrong people faster than poverty ever could." Back at the lodge, work began in pieces. One section of roof at a time, one beam replaced, one wall reinforced. Mara Bellamy returned often, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes just to watch. She never interfered unless necessary. But she watched everything. One afternoon, she stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, observing as Caleb directed a small crew he had brought in, 2 local workers, quiet men who followed instructions without questions. Mara's gaze moved from the structure to Rowan. "You're not rushing," she said. "No. Most people would." Rowan wiped dust from his hands. "Most people don't plan on staying." Mara tilted her head slightly. "And you do?" Rowan didn't answer right away. Flint approached then, stopping near Mara, sniffing the air lightly. Not at her, but around her. He circled once, then sat. Mara glanced down at him. "He trusts you," she said. Rowan looked at the dog. "He doesn't trust easily." Mara nodded once. Neither do I. The accident happened late in the afternoon. The light had turned soft, filtering gold through the trees, when one of the older support beams inside the lodge gave way unexpectedly. It wasn't a collapse. Not fully. But enough. Wood cracked sharply, echoing through the structure. Caleb shouted, stepping back. Dust filled the air. And Flint. Flint didn't run away. He ran toward it. Rowan moved instinctively. Flint! Too late. The dog slipped through the partially fallen frame, disappearing into the haze. Rowan followed without thinking, boots crunching over debris, pushing through broken wood and hanging plaster. Inside, visibility dropped. The air was thick. Flint! Rowan called again, voice sharper now. A faint sound answered. Not a bark. A low, controlled whine. Rowan moved toward it, pushing aside splintered boards until he saw him. Flint was pinned. Not badly, but enough. A beam had fallen across his hind leg, trapping him. The dog didn't struggle wildly. He held still, waiting. Rowan dropped to his knees, hands already moving, lifting the beam just enough. Easy, easy. Caleb reached them seconds later, helping shift the weight. Together, they freed him. Flint pulled back, limping slightly, but standing. Rowan's hands moved quickly over him, checking, assessing. No break. Bruised, minor cut. Nothing life-threatening. Still. Rowan stayed there longer than necessary, one hand resting against the dog's neck, breathing slower, grounding himself. Around them, the lodge creaked again. Caleb wiped dust from his face. He went straight in, he muttered. Didn't hesitate. Rowan didn't look up. I know. Flint shifted his weight, testing his leg, then nudged Rowan's shoulder lightly, as if to say, I'm still here. Rowan exhaled, and in that moment, the truth settled deeper than anything he had read in his father's letter. Not the gold, not the land, not the house. This was what mattered. Work resumed the next day, slower, more careful, but stronger. Rowan sold another piece of gold through Elias, paid the first round of taxes, ordered proper materials. The lodge began to change. Not all at once, but enough that it no longer looked like something waiting to collapse. It looked like something being reclaimed. At dusk, Rowan stood on the porch again. Flint lay nearby, leg resting but no longer favoring it. The forest moved around them. Alive. Unbothered. Rowan looked out across the trees, thought of Preston, of Vivian, of the choices made in that quiet office. He didn't feel anger. Not anymore. Just distance. Some roads you didn't go back down. Flint shifted, then stood, moving to stand beside him, shoulder to leg, solid, present. Rowan rested a hand lightly against his back. We're not leaving, he said quietly. Not a decision, a statement. Flint didn't react. He didn't need to. He had already known. 5 months changed the lodge. Not all at once. Not in any dramatic, cinematic way. There was no single moment where Mercer Ridge transformed from ruin to sanctuary. It happened slowly, board by board, nail by nail, decision by decision. The roof no longer sagged like a broken spine. Fresh timber replaced rot, though the wood was still raw, pale against the older structure. Windows were repaired, not replaced entirely, but restored where possible. The porch stood again, solid underfoot. It didn't look rich. It looked lived in, earned. Rowan Mercer stood at the edge of the clearing one early morning, coffee in hand, watching the mist drift low between the trees. Flint stood beside him, weight evenly balanced now, the earlier injury reduced to memory and instinct. The dog's ears flicked at distant sounds. Birds, wind, something moving far off beyond the visible. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Behind them, Caleb Boone hammered steadily inside the lodge, each strike deliberate, measured. The rhythm had become familiar, like a heartbeat stitched into the place itself. Mara Bellamy's truck sat near the edge of the clearing. She leaned against the hood, reviewing a clipboard, her brow slightly furrowed as she checked permit notes and restoration progress. She had stopped questioning Rowan's intent weeks ago. Now, she watched something else. Consistency. Commitment. Most people didn't last this long. Across the country, something very different was unfolding. Preston Mercer didn't notice it at first. He was too busy enjoying what he believed was his victory. The apartment overlooking the city's skyline, the polished floors, the quiet hum of wealth surrounding him. He moved easily in that world. Tailored suits, precise schedules, controlled conversations. But control is a fragile thing when it's built on assumptions. The first delay came from the bank. A transfer that should have taken hours stretched into days. Then came the second message, formal, cautious. Additional verification required. Preston didn't panic. He called, he pushed. He reminded them who he was. The third call was different. No answers, just deflection. And then, silence. Vivian Mercer noticed before he did. She always felt shifts in stability faster than she understood them. She had already spent part of her share, refinancing debts, maintaining appearances, preserving a life that depended on illusion more than substance. Her home looked perfect. Her world felt intact. Until it didn't. The first notification came late at night. Account review. The second came in the morning. Temporary hold. The third came with no explanation at all. Frozen. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then called Preston. This time, he didn't sound in control. The news broke quietly at first. A small article, a mention of financial irregularities. Then a larger one, then names, then numbers. And suddenly, what had been private became public. Federal investigation, tax exposure, asset seizure. Words that didn't disappear once spoken. It was early afternoon when Rowan heard the car. Not Caleb's truck. Not Mara's. Something different. Flint heard it first. He stepped forward from the porch, body shifting. Not aggressive, not defensive. Aware. Rowan set his coffee down. Watched the narrow road through the trees. The car appeared slowly. A dull gray rental coated in road dust, out of place against the green silence of the forest. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, engine off. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. Preston stepped out. Rowan didn't recognize him immediately. The posture was wrong, the confidence gone. His suit was still expensive, but wrinkled now, worn unevenly. His hair, once perfect, had grown slightly out of shape. His face, sharper, hollowed, carried something new. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. Vivian stepped out from the passenger's side. Her coat was still elegant, but it hung differently now. Looser, as if she had lost weight too quickly. Her eyes, once controlled, now moved constantly, scanning, searching for something solid. Neither of them spoke at first. They just stood there, looking at the lodge, at the work, at what had become of the thing they had dismissed. Flint stepped forward, not barking, not growling, just placing himself between Rowan and them. Not blocking aggressively, but clearly, present. Preston swallowed. "Rowan," he said. His voice cracked slightly. Just once, Rowan didn't move. He stood where he was, hands resting loosely at his sides. Caleb stepped out of the doorway behind him, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed the situation. Mara remained near her truck, watching, not interfering. No one rushed. No one escalated. Preston took a step forward, then stopped. like he had remembered something, or realized something. "We need to talk," he said. Rowan nodded once. "Talk." Preston glanced briefly at Flint, then back at Rowan. "There's been complications," he began. Rowan said nothing. Vivian stepped forward instead. Her voice was softer, fragile. "The accounts," she said. "They're frozen. Everything is under investigation." Rowan's expression didn't change. "We didn't know," she added quickly. "We didn't see it. The paperwork, it wasn't clear." "It was clear," Rowan said calmly. The words weren't sharp, just final. Preston exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We made a mistake," he admitted. It sounded unnatural in his voice, like a language he hadn't practiced. Rowan watched him, not with satisfaction, not with resentment, just distance. Vivian took another step. "Rowan, please," she said. "We need help." Flint shifted slightly, not moving forward, not retreating, just adjusting his stance, firm, grounded. Rowan looked at her, really looked this time, saw the exhaustion beneath the surface, the cracks in the carefully built image, the fear she couldn't hide anymore. "I can't fix that," he said. "You could," Preston snapped suddenly. "You found something here. You've got money. You've got resources." Rowan cut him off with a small shake of his head. "You're asking the wrong question." Preston stared at him. "Then what's the right one?" Rowan paused, then said quietly, "Why didn't you look closer?" Silence fell again. Not heavy, not explosive, just still. Vivian's eyes filled slightly. "We trusted what we saw," she whispered. Rowan nodded. "That's the problem." Preston took a step forward again. Flint moved immediately. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough. A line drawn. Preston stopped. He looked down at the dog, then back at Rowan. Something passed through his expression. Recognition. Not of the dog, of the moment. "You're really not going to help us," he said. Rowan held his gaze. "No, not harsh, not emotional, just true." Preston looked away first. Vivian wiped at her eyes quickly, turning slightly, as if embarrassed by the reaction. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Rowan spoke again. "5 months ago," he said, "we all stood in the same room." Preston didn't respond. "You had a choice," Rowan continued. Vivian closed her eyes briefly. Rowan's voice remained steady. "So did I." Flint stood still beside him, unmoving, certain. Preston exhaled slowly, then nodded. Once. Not agreement. Acceptance. He turned back toward the car. Vivian hesitated. Looked at Rowan one last time, like she wanted to say something else. Then didn't. She followed her brother. The car door closed. The engine started. And slowly, they left. The sound faded quickly into the forest. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was settled. Caleb stepped closer, glancing at Rowan. "You okay?" he asked. Rowan nodded. "Yeah." Mara approached as well, her gaze thoughtful. "That didn't look easy," she said. Rowan picked up his coffee again. It had gone cold. "Wasn't supposed to be." Flint returned to his side, brushing lightly against his leg. Not seeking reassurance, giving it. Rowan rested his hand briefly against the dog's back. The lodge stood behind them, stronger now, not perfect, but real. Rowan looked out toward the trees once more, not at what had been lost, not at what could have been, just at what was. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he owed anyone an explanation. Winter came quietly to Mercer Ridge. It didn't arrive with a storm or a warning. It settled in slowly, like a long breath finally released after months of holding tension. The forest shifted color first, green fading into muted grays and pale whites, branches thinning, sky widening through the skeletal outline of trees. The lodge stood in the clearing, no longer forgotten. Not perfect, but alive. Smoke curled gently from the rebuilt chimney in the early mornings. The porch held weight without complaint. Windows glowed faintly at night, not bright, not extravagant, just enough to say someone was there, someone had stayed. Rowan Mercer stood near the edge of the clearing, hands tucked into the pockets of his olive field jacket, breath visible in the cold air. The lines on his face hadn't softened, but something behind his eyes had. Not lighter, clearer. Flint moved beside him, slower now, not weak but measured. Age hadn't taken his strength yet, but it had begun to refine it. His coat had thickened for the winter, black and tan blending into the muted colors of the forest. His eyes remained the same, steady, alert, and impossibly present. A truck pulled up along the narrow path, not new, not polished, functional. Rowan didn't turn immediately. He already knew who it was. The door opened and Jonah Pike stepped out. Mid-50s, tall, broad-shouldered, but worn in a different way than Rowan. Where Rowan's strength came from discipline, Jonah's came from endurance. His face was lined deeply, skin rough from years of outdoor labor. His hair, once dark, had turned gray unevenly, cut short without much care. He wore a thick brown canvas jacket over a faded thermal shirt, heavy work pants, boots that had seen more winters than most people. His movements were slower, not weak, but deliberate, like a man who measured effort because he had learned what it cost. Jonah walked toward the porch, stopping a few steps away. He looked at the lodge, then at Rowan. "Didn't think anyone would bring this place back," he said. His voice carried gravel, years of smoking, years of silence, years of saying only what mattered. Rowan nodded once. "Didn't plan to," he replied. Jonah gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah," he said. "That's usually how it starts." Flint approached, stopping a few feet from Jonah. Not tense, not welcoming, just assessing. Jonah glanced down at the dog. "That one yours?" he asked. Rowan nodded. "Keeps me honest?" Jonah studied Flint for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. Approval, or at least recognition. "Good," he said. "Places like this need that." The lodge had changed in ways that didn't show in blueprints. The main room now held mismatched chairs, none of them new, all of them usable. A long table stood near the fireplace, repaired but still bearing the marks of its past. The walls had been cleaned, not replaced. History wasn't erased, it was stabilized. And people had started coming. Not many, just enough. A man who had served too long and didn't know how to stop moving. Another who had stopped moving entirely and needed a reason to stand again. They didn't arrive with announcements. They arrived quietly, like they hoped no one would notice. Rowan didn't ask questions they weren't ready to answer. He just gave them space. Flint moved among them carefully, not playful, not distant. He adjusted himself to each presence, resting near one, watching another, following a third when something didn't feel right. He didn't fix anyone, but he made it harder for them to disappear. It happened on a late afternoon when the sky hung low and pale, the kind of light that flattened everything into quiet reflection. A boy stood at the edge of the clearing. Rowan saw him before the others did. Small, maybe 9 or 10 years old, thin, bundled in a coat too big for him, sleeves hanging past his hands. His hair was dark, unkempt, falling into his eyes. His face was pale, not sick, but cautious, like someone who had learned early not to expect warmth. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, watching. Flint noticed him next. The dog froze for a moment. Not in alert, not in warning. Recognition. Slowly, Flint walked toward the boy. Not fast, not direct, curved, giving space. The boy didn't run, didn't retreat. He just watched Flint approach, his eyes wide but steady. Flint stopped a few feet away. Then, unexpectedly, he lowered himself. Not sitting, not lying down, lowering, making himself smaller. The boy blinked. Something shifted in his face. Not fear, something softer. Rowan walked over slowly, stopping behind Flint. "You lost?" Rowan asked gently. The boy shook his head. "No, sir." His voice was quiet but clear. He glanced at the lodge, then back at Rowan. "My mom said this place..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Helps people." Rowan didn't answer immediately. He looked at Flint, then at the boy. "What do you need?" he asked. The boy shrugged slightly. "Don't know yet." Flint moved closer, just enough to touch the boy's hand lightly with his nose. The boy didn't pull away. He stayed. And for a moment, something invisible passed between them, something simple, something honest. The kind of connection that didn't need explanation. Rowan felt it. Not as a memory, not as a plan, as a confirmation. The boy stayed that evening. His name was Noah Wren. He didn't say much about where he came from. Rowan didn't press. Mara later mentioned his mother had worked seasonal forestry jobs, moving often, never staying long enough to settle. Now she was gone. Not dramatically, not tragically in a way that made headlines. Just gone. Another quiet absence. Noah moved carefully through the lodge, touching things lightly like he wasn't sure they belonged to him. Flint stayed close. Not hovering, but never far. At dinner, Noah sat at the far end of the table, watching more than eating. Caleb told a story about a collapsed bridge he once rebuilt in the middle of a storm, exaggerating just enough to make it sound impossible. Jonah listened with a faint smile, shaking his head at the right moments. Noah didn't laugh, but he listened, and he stayed. That night, Rowan stepped out onto the porch again. The cold had deepened. The sky stretched clear, stars sharp against the dark. Flint lay near the steps, head resting on his paws, eyes open. Rowan leaned against the railing, looking out across the trees. Not searching, not waiting, just present. He thought about the chamber below, the gold, the documents, the choices. All of it still there, unchanged, but somehow smaller. Or maybe he had just grown past needing it to define anything. The door creaked softly behind him. Noah stepped out, wrapping his coat tighter. "Can't sleep?" Rowan asked. Noah shook his head. "Too quiet," he said. Rowan nodded. "Yeah." They stood there together for a while. No pressure, no questions, just shared silence. Then Noah spoke again. "Did you find treasure here?" he asked. Rowan didn't answer right away. He looked down at Flint. The dog shifted slightly, as if aware of the question. Rowan let out a slow breath. "Not the kind you're thinking of." Noah frowned slightly. "What kind, then?" Rowan rested his hands on the railing, thought about it, then said, "The kind you don't notice until you almost lose it." Noah didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Sometimes that was enough. Flint stood, stretching slowly, then settled back down, closer to both of them now. The forest moved quietly around them. The lodge held steady behind them. And somewhere beneath it all, unchanged, untouched, was everything Rowan had once thought mattered most. But now, standing there in the cold, with a boy who had nowhere else to go, and a dog who had never left his side, Rowan understood something else. Some things weren't meant to be taken. They were meant to be kept, protected, lived, and when the wind moved through the pines that night, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like something older, something steady, something that had been there long before any of them arrived, and would remain long after. Sometimes the miracle we are waiting for does not come as a sudden blessing from the sky. It comes quietly, hidden inside the choices we almost walk away from. It comes in the moments when we choose to stay, to protect, to care, even when it would be easier to leave. God does not always give us what looks valuable at first. Sometimes He gives us something broken, something heavy, something that demands patience and faith. And only those who keep going, who listen, who trust, who refuse to give up, are allowed to see what was truly there all along. In everyday life, we all face our own Mercer Ridge Lodge, a situation that feels like a burden, a responsibility we didn't ask for, a path that seems harder than the rest. But maybe, just maybe, that is where your purpose is hidden. That is where your miracle is waiting. So if you are going through something difficult right now, don't rush to abandon it. Take a moment. Look closer. Pray. Trust that God may be shaping something stronger in you, even if you cannot see it yet. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or what choice in your life felt like a burden, but turned out to be a blessing. And don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories for more stories that remind us what truly matters. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and protect you and your loved ones, wherever you are.